Tonight I have the honor of introducing to you a woman who almost needs no introduction, but we're going to give her one anyway. She is a woman of firsts. In 1970, she became the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Virginia Law School. She was the first African American to be elected to the ABA Board of Governors in 1988. She was the first woman to hold the position of Director-Counsel and President of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the position from which tonight's awardee has just stepped down. She was also one of the first women to defend death row inmates. She has worked on more landmark civil rights cases than I can mention, and she played a key role in passing civil rights legislation such as the Voting Rights Act amendments of 1982, the Fair Housing Act of 1988, the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1988, and the Civil Rights Act of 1991. Of course, she received the Thurgood Marshall Award herself in 2011. One of the things that stood out to me most, though, about Ms. Jones, Attorney Jones, is that when she started her legal career, she turned down a well-paying job at what was then Richard Nixon's law firm and instead devoted her life to public interest law, where she too spoke the truth to every form of error, and we are better for it. I can't think of anyone better suited to give us remarks appropriate to the occasion tonight and to introduce tonight's awardee. So please help me welcome the incomparable Elaine Jones to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very, very much for being so gracious and so enthusiastic and so generous. And I know it's you and not the wine, but I'm still very grateful. I want to thank the section. This is an extraordinary place. This is home within the ABA. This section on civil rights and social justice. This is home. When I was active in this section, and I hope it's still the case, that you are the conscience of the ABA. You're the conscious things they really don't want to hear you bring up. You know, you bring it up when you figure out how to get it before the powers that be, and you know, how to phrase whatever it is you're trying to get done, and when to bring it before the House of Delegates, and what kind of support you need to have. And this is where you do the strategy and the thinking and the putting it together, and we're grateful to you. Now, you have always encouraged the association to adopt policies that are supportive of civil rights and social justice. And I remember joining this section in the late 1970s. Yes? That's when it was. In the late 1970s, and it was this section, you know, charity begins at home. This section decided that the Board of Governors had never had an African American to serve on it. That was in the 1970s. So it knew that. Around 10 years later, no African American had served, and the section said, all right, Elaine, we're going to have a vote. And you're going to be our section. Section had the seat coming up. We want you to go to the Board of Governors to represent the section. Now, the section had to do a lot of homework. for that to happen. You know, it's a very convoluted process, and it was no accident that all those years you never had anybody. And so, you know, there was leadership that you could turn to, and you did. And you had presidents, and you had John Pickering, and you had a whole bunch of folk, Jack Curtin, and you knew people. You always know people. And you talk to these people, and you look up in 1988, I am on the Board of Governors, representing the section. So that's how I became the first African American on the Board of Governors. It was the section that did it. You didn't know that, because you weren't maybe, some of you were around in the late 70s, 80s. Some of you were not. But the section did that. And it was just not a good look, the way things were looking, you know. And so bring up the photo of the Board of Governors in 1988 and 1989, and I'll bet you'll have a difficult time finding me. I invite you to go in the archives and look that up. Now, 1988, the year I joined the Board of Governors, was the year that tonight's honoree, Sherlyn Eiffel, came to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She was 1 year out of NYU Law School, had a little fellowship for a year with the ACLU, and so then decided she wanted to make big money, so she came to LDF. The Legal Defense Fund, and the head of the Legal Defense Fund at that time was the brilliant Julius Chambers. He was the third Director-Counsel. Thurgood was the first, Jack Greenberg next, and then Julius was Director-Counsel from 1984 to December of 1992. And so in 1988, he hired Sherlyn. Now here was Julius, University of North Carolina graduate, African-American, only African-American in his class, graduated UNO, first in his class, editor of the Law Review. And then they held the graduation dinner at a segregated club, so he couldn't attend. I mean, you know, that was life. That was life. I mean, you know, we moved forward. And so Julius was head of LDF, and his interview with Sherlyn was very brief. I mean, you don't need to spend a lot of time with Sherlyn to know you want to hire. I mean, you know, and you could figure that out, which he did. And Sherlyn came on board, and at that point, I had been at LDF 18 years by that time. So there's a little distance between us, but that's all right, too. You know, we all have something to look forward to. So when she came on board, voting rights was her passion. And that was where a lot of work needed to be done with the Voting Rights Act in terms of implementing it and applying it. And she had two lawyers at the LDF, Lonnie Guinier, and Lonnie was funeralized yesterday at Martha's Vineyard, and Pam Carlin of Stanford. Lonnie and Pam were on the staff, and they left LDF soon after Sherlyn came on, but they stuck with Sherlyn those 2 years that she was there, and they advised her. LDF paid them not a dime. They tried to escape into the academy. You know how you guys do. This litigation gets to you after a while, and you got to get a break, so you just got to escape. And so they escaped into the academy, and Sherlyn relied on them heavily, and do you know that Sherlyn made a huge difference in voting rights? She was able to get the Voting Rights Act applied to the election of state court judges, the first time it had ever happened. And she did it within 2 years of being at the Legal Defense Fund. Now, Thurgood was one of the greatest civil rights lawyers and strategists of our time. We know that. And so this small band of lawyers that he formed, LDF, in 1940, so it's 82 years today, under the umbrella of this new organizational concept in New York, a non-profit civil rights law firm. The New York courts did not know what he was talking about. A non-profit civil rights law firm. That concept was just, so he had to get the firms to help him and explain, and we became that entity. Now, in that 82 years, LDF has had 7 director-counsels who have completed terms of service. The 8th is Janae Nelson, who's successor to tonight's honoree, and she assumed her duties in March of this year. But tonight we are here to honor Sherlyn Eiffel, LDF's 7th director-counsel, who served ably for nearly 10 years, from 2013 to 2022. Her leadership has been called visionary and transformational during a challenging and transformational time, and every word of that is true. Now, it's when you think about Sherlyn in that 5 years, she stayed at LDF for 5 years when she got there in 88, and she left in 93. Sherlyn, I don't take it personally, because I don't think it was personal. But 93 is the year I became director-counsel. And I looked up and you were gone. Now, we have never discussed that. But that's all right. This is among friends. I think it may have been because that beautiful daughter sitting there to your left, and you having beautiful children, and LDF was not easy on family life. LDF is a piece of work when it comes to family. I mean, all that traveling, up and down, you had to make the trips yourself and go to the community meetings and go to and all that, and it couldn't be, delegated to anyone else. So I prefer to think that is why you took your leave. And then you went to the University of Maryland, where you spent 20 years teaching and building your various legal clinics and dealing with the whole question of ex-felons being able to transition back into society, and writing your book on the courthouse lawn on lynching, the study of lynching in the 21st century. And that book, 10 years later, I see that you, Brian Stevenson, we have a new edition. So everybody, you got to read Sherlyn's book. It's very well done. Okay, that's what when you honor people, then you have to go and do what you have to do to honor them. All right, so and it's called On the Courthouse Lawn. Now, as I said earlier, when Julius knew talent and he hired her, Thurgood also knew talent. That's when he saw to it that Julius came to the Legal Defense Fund. Julius was number 3, it connects. Thurgood and Jack Greenberg, Thurgood's successor, raised the money and set up a scholarship fund that they would send young people who wanted to be civil rights lawyers to law school. They would go to law school, they would pay their rent for several years in the office, they would pay for their secretary and give them a salary. And that's how they began to seed lawyers throughout the South who became the Legal Defense Fund cooperating attorneys. And Julius Chambers got that scholarship, he and Marion Wright Edelman, in the early 60s. And that's why Julius had the first interracial law firm in North Carolina. And so all across the country, especially the South, we had that program. Now, that program, Jack carried it from 61 when he became director-counsel. He left in 84, but the program was eliminated in 75. Why? It worked. Too much money. Who had that kind of cash? You just couldn't get it. I mean, to send folks to law school, to guarantee them a salary when they came out, to pay the office expenses, the secretary, and the rent. And the fact that he did it for 15 years, we were all very proud of Jack. But when he had to give it up, you didn't hear a whimper from the rest of us because we knew how hard it was. All right, so when Shirley came aboard, her intellect and commitment were readily apparent, and she jumped headfirst into I told you, into the voting rights advocacy, but she also did it as Director-Counsel with all of the issues. As Director-Counsel, she came on in 2013. She taught for 20 years and came back to us in 2013. And one of the things I'm most proud of, and I did after leaving being Director-Counsel, is persuading Shirley to come to the legal defense, or one of many, because we needed her. Sometimes those of you who read the good book, you come into the kingdom for such a time as this. LDF needed Shirley Eiffel in 2013. And she came there and gave us everything. On the litigation side, defending fair elections. Remember post office and the joy and all of that? Shirley had to file a lawsuit to try to straighten him out as best she could in terms of delivering the absentee ballots. The think tanks and the task forces that she served on, the Obama task force on police reform, and Biden's task force on the Supreme Court, and the litigation to force reforms in policing, and the accessible transportation issues, fairness and environmental. Remember the water issue in Michigan? That's Shirley trying to straighten out that water issue. Death penalty cases in the Supreme Court. Fair housing, quality public education. The list goes on and on and on. Just go to the website and look at the litigation docket between 2013 and 2022. It's there you can see it for yourself. She's a visionary. She succeeded in transforming LDF in ways I could only dream of. I closed the LA office because it didn't have the money. Keep it open. Shirley opened a new Atlanta office because she did have the money and could establish a new one. The board voted to establish a think tank, the Marshall Institute, the Thurgood Marshall Institute. They told me, Elaine, we need a research arm at LDF. That goal was realized when Shirley became Director-Counsel and established the Thurgood Marshall Institute, and it's an interdisciplinary center at LDF, research, advocacy, and archival. You walk down the hall, you're likely to see a lawyer as well as a historian or an economist. That's an integral part of the LDF operation now. On Martin Luther King's birthday last year, 2021, remember that program I told you about that Jack had to shut down at 65? Who gave it a new birth in a new way? Who strengthened it? Shirley Eiffel established at the Legal Defense Fund the Marshall Motley Scholarship Program. That same program that Jack walked away from, Shirley found the resources and started it. Now we have 2 classes of students going to law school who are committed to litigating and practicing civil rights law in the South. That's Shirley. Now, in addition to that, the communications department is unrecognizable in its scope, effect, and size. She's doubled the size of the staff, and she's raised the salaries while she's doubled the size. Not only has she fulfilled her goals, she found the resources. You can have vision and come up with ideas, but you got to find the money to pay for it, and pay for it going out. And she has done much of that. So I'm going to say about Shirley Eiffel, she's a practicing trial lawyer. She's a teacher of lawyers and law students. She's a prodigious reader. She's a superb writer. She's an excellent manager. She's an institutional visionary. She's a strategic problem solver, excellent communicator, winning personality, political savvy, all those things I didn't have. She's got all in one package sitting right there. Knows how to speak truth to power, knows how to take advice, also knows how to give it. And she knows how to raise the money. You got to raise the money. Can't do it. And if you don't have the money, I want to see it happen. It does not happen without the resources. That's why I thank all of you here for supporting the work of the section and supporting the work of the American Bar Association. It doesn't happen without the resources. So as I close, I want to say, when Shirley told me she felt it was time to leave, what could I say? 9 years. 9 years. I mean, LDF Director-Counsel is not a job. It's a mission. It's all-consuming. It's day and night. It never stops. It never stops. The problems go on, and they come back. Those you solve come back in different forms. So we got to, all I could say is, Shirley, we are grateful for what you have done. You've got a loving husband and 3 daughters that you haven't seen in 9 years. So who am I to say, you got to stay, round it out, give me another year. I mean, you can't do that. And I said, so I thought about that, and then I thought about what Shirley, I said, you got to let her go. You got to let her have a life. You owe it to her. And 2015, that Amtrak accident, Shirley was on that train that night, going and then playing a train from D.C. and going up to New York somewhere, and the Amtrak had an accident in Philadelphia. 8 people killed. It was a bad one. And as Shirley walking down the track, dazed, not even knowing where she was, this is 2 years into being Director-Counsel. Most folks would have walked in. They would have said enough. She didn't walk. She stayed another 7 years. And that she didn't leave us until the first part of this year. And so she hadn't left us still. All that she knows, all that she's doing now, she's writing her book, which I'm sure she will write somewhat selectively, hopefully. But she's writing her book, and she's thinking, and she's serving on the boards, the Baltimore Museum of Art, Profiles in Courage, she's on boards. She's doing all the wonderful things one does when you continue to give back to the community. So colleagues, friends, section members, you have done something special this evening. You have accomplished a unique achievement. Many people deserve awards, and they do receive them. However, none is more deserving than the honoree you graciously award this evening, Shirley Eiffel. I see a broad smile on Thurgood's face, a broad smile. The honoree fits the moment, and the moment embraces the honoree. Thank you all very much.